Hello, good morning everybody. How are we doing today? My name is Katherine Hoerauf. I worked with Advith Ramachan and Jonathan Henn to create this project. We spent a lot of time out in the grasslands around Boulder County this summer, understanding plant traits and trying to turn them into fire forecasts. First, I would like to start off with a land acknowledgement, acknowledging that the city of Boulder is on ceded territory of the indigenous people from these lands. We know that the indigenous people of these lands stewarded and cared for these lands in a way that science is just catching up to today. And I want to acknowledge the rich history and the culture in which we are living and working with, and the history of fire that they used to live in our, expand our ecosystem and make it healthier, and I hope to bring that to us as well. Today, more homes are threatened and destroyed by grassland wildfires in the United States than by forest fires, and this is due to more homes being built in the prairies, and events like the Marshall and the Maui fires show us how devastating these events can be. Unfortunately, though, grasslands still remain understudied due to a few factors, mostly because when you're driving past the grasslands, you just think of it as grass. But when you step in and slow down and get a little bit closer, you can see there's a lot going on out there. I had a lot of fun just looking at all the plants this summer. These are all pictures I took myself. You've got everything from your tiny little pea flower up to your giant mullein, all the way to a native tomato plant that we found here in the plains. Everything here serves a purpose and as forms of the water cycle, helping with tourism, and also with agriculture in the form of grazing and farming. And there's a huge amount of species richness that we see here. Species richness is a measurement of biodiversity that quantifies how many species are in a given area. But first thing we really want to do is assess the wildfire risk in our area. So we start off by looking at fuel models. Fuel models are a very, very basic version of a fire model. Kind of think of it as like a three-step process. First, you start at your fuel model and you put in your very basic fuel information like fuel moisture and fuel load, and then you take it and you put it, you get very basic information about the fire, like your rate of spread and your heat per area release. And then you can take that information and input it into a fire model that is more physics-based and can tell you what a fire will do across a landscape, including slope and other factors like weather. Then, once you analyze your fire model, then you can look at a map and start analyzing what your risk is. And, oops, sorry, this is actually a map of Boulder County. I'm sorry, it's so small. But it shows the majority of the west side or the east side of Boulder as kind of the same type, and we'll see why in a second. Most of our grasslands around Boulder County are generalized as GR2 grasslands, which means they are dry climate with a low fuel load. And we believe that this fails to capture the diversity of the grasslands that we see around Boulder County and the Front Range. What these little maps are, so this yellow big map is what the GR2 is telling us. This blue is the Marshall Lake just outside of Boulder County. And so all of this area is GR2, but when we look at it through a productivity map, we can start to see more variability. And then when we look at the specific vegetation types that are in the same area, there's a lot more variability than is what is shown in our GR2 model. So my question is, do these different vegetation types actually produce different fire behavior? So in order to do that, we hiked around Boulder County this summer. We went to 78 different sites and collected biomass and counted species richness. So we would hike out, find our little site, which was sometimes kind of hard, and then we would measure each height, and then we would also count the number of species and name each species in there. So my mentors have a vast amount of plant knowledge. I thought I knew plants, but man, they know their plants. And then we cut all of the standing vegetation, and then we bag it, and then we collect all of the dead litter as well. That is all the plant material from last year that has died and is now laying on the ground. We collect that as well to account both of those for our biomass after it's been dried. I want you guys to, this is what it looks like when it's left, and I want you to look at how uniform this grass is here. This is a smooth brome patch. And that'll come up in a little bit. And all of this data, we input it into R and cleaned it, made it easier to read, and then input the biofuel data and the height into our behave fire model and kept a lot of the variables the same just to see if the height and the biomass availability would change anything. So that's this graph here. And so we're looking at the mean height by the total fuel load, which has been multiplied to get the correct units, so pounds per acre instead of grams per square foot. And so what we see is we have 4 different vegetation types. Smooth brome, prairie dog colony, which isn't a vegetation type, but they act on the vegetation and create a new area around them. If you've ever been around a prairie dog colony, it's very low. They clip all of the plants around them so they can see, and they also, for some reason, bindweed really loves that area, and it just takes over. But what I really want us to look at is see the dashed lines here are GR2 line. These represent our GR2 model, and this is what most of Boulder County thinks how our fuels is. So it thinks it only goes up to like a foot tall and with only like a pound per acre of biofuel. But we can see there's a lot more variability going on there, and then as I pointed out here, the higher up you go in this graph, the more fire risk you have, because the more biomass availability, more fire you're going to have. And this is showed here when I take it into the behave fire model. I take those biomass, put it into the behave fire model, and the GR2 line is here. This is what we think our fires will be. But as we can see, there's a lot more variability between our vegetation types than we originally assumed. This is especially bad with the smooth brome because it can spread a lot faster and it releases a lot more heat. So that means you can combust other sources like your home or a big tree. But we also see the prairie dog colony has really low fuel fire behavior, but that's not necessarily a good thing, because when we look at our species richness, both smooth brome and prairie dog colonies have low species richness. So these are not mutually exclusive. Just because you have bad fire behavior or low fire behavior and low species richness, they're not necessarily equal. But when we look at our prairie dog, our mixed grass prairies and our tall grass prairies, we only have a moderate fire level. It is still moderate, and we do still have some risk, but because of species richness and needs for biodiversity, we can see that these are a lot more healthier systems, because you can have almost 15 different plants in like a tiny 2 square foot area. And as a lot of us know, that's better for your bees and your butterflies and all that good stuff to have different plants to eat off of. So in conclusion, there are huge variations within the grasslands that is not represented in our fine fuel models, and we need to create more precise fuel modeling for the grasslands and identify the risky vegetation types so we can better mitigate the risk to our communities. And I would just like to acknowledge my mentors once again for the amount of wonderful information that they have, the whole Stewarding Lab for collecting this data over the past 3 years, the RECCS team, and OSMP for granting experimental land. Any questions?